One day, I was in school for a seemingly average Thursday. I was a senior in high school and in my third-hour history class. This was one of my favorite classes because the teacher was really cool. For this story, I'll just call him Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was very laid back and would give us a lot of time to do homework in class. We would rarely have any actual homework because we could get it all done before we left. He would teach for a bit in the beginning, and then the end of class would pretty much be like study hall. We could talk and get work done. He would even let us go on our phones or listen to music as we worked. So on this day, it was a normal class period. I often had my headphones in as I studied, and I did on this day. We were working on our assignment, and I got done early. I would joke around with Mr. Smith sometimes, as did other students. I remember that I went up to him to turn in my assignment, and he asked me if I wanted to do him a favor. He said that he had to give back some iPads to another teacher. We had used them the previous day for a group assignment thing. There were about 10 iPads in this carrying case. I was happy to do this because it was something to do to get out of class. He wrote me a pass and I took the iPad case. It was supposed to go to a teacher's classroom that was a little ways away. I left the classroom with my headphones still in and I unpaused my music. Then I started walking through the empty hallways to the other teacher's classroom. At this point, there was probably about 15 minutes left of class. Soon, I reached the classroom that I was supposed to go to. I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I could see in the window as well that all of the lights were off. I found this a bit odd, but quickly figured that the teacher wasn't there. She probably didn't teach a class during this hour or something. I turned around and started to head back to my classroom. I walked about halfway back when I saw something up ahead. There was a spot where two hallways intersected a ways up. I saw a man up ahead who I didn't recognize. He clearly wasn't a teacher, and I didn't think he worked at the school either. It struck me as suspicious right away. I only saw him for about a second or two because he passed by one hallway and into the other. He didn't look in my direction at all. The problem was that he was walking in the direction that my classroom was in. I kept walking up ahead, and when I got to where the man had walked past, I stopped and looked down the hallway first. When I did, I saw the guy again. He was a long ways down, near where my classroom was. It appeared as though he was looking for something. I didn't want to go down there, and I started walking in the opposite direction. I took out my headphones at that point. Everything was silent. I didn't really know where I was going anymore, and I was trying to figure out what exactly was going on. After walking around the empty hallways for like 5 minutes, I thought maybe the man was gone by then, and I started heading back for my class. When I got back to the hallway where I had last seen him, he was gone. I was just glad to see this, and I started walking down the hallway for my class. Just a few steps later, though, I heard footsteps coming from behind me and around the corner. They were going towards me, and there were some bathrooms right there, so I just went inside. I didn't know who the person was, but I really didn't want them to see me. By now, I figured that they weren't supposed to be in the school. After going inside of the bathroom, at first, I just waited inside. But when the footsteps got closer, I moved into one of the stalls. The guy passed by and did not go inside. I waited a little while longer before looking out of the bathroom. When I did, I saw that the person was a ways down the hallway, once again near where my class was. I left the bathroom and quickly tried to walk to the other hallway, away from this guy. I must have been loud or something when I did, because as I was walking, I heard movement behind me. I looked and saw the guy looking right at me. He turned and started walking in my direction. The guy was really far behind me, at least over 100 feet. I walked as quickly as possible out of that hallway and took another one. By this point, I just wanted to get out of the school or far away from the guy. I walked down that hallway for a while and then took a left to another one. I was going to the stairs to go down to the first floor. As I approached the stairs, though, I heard somebody coming up the stairs. I stopped and didn't know who this person could be. When they came into view, I saw that it was a police officer. He asked me what I was doing, and I asked him what was going on. He told me that the school was under a lockdown, and they were searching for a suspicious man. I pointed him in the direction that I had last seen him. Then I went downstairs and saw several more officers. I showed them my student ID, and we found a nearby classroom, and I had to wait inside there until the lockdown was over. It lasted for probably about 15 more minutes, and then it ended. We were let out, and by then, it was time for the next class period. I'm not sure who that guy was, or what he was even doing. I also don't know how he got into our school either. I hadn't been able to hear that we were going into lockdown though because my headphones were in and I couldn't hear anything. Looking back, if I would have known, I would have tried to go into any classroom. I don't know what would have happened to me if that guy caught up with me either, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. This happened when I was in high school. For some detail, I'm a female and was a junior at the time this took place. I used to walk to school and back every day because I lived pretty close to the school. So it would usually take me around 10 to 15 minutes to walk there, and I would take sidewalks basically the entire way. One morning, I left when I usually did at about 7:30 a.m. because school started at 7:50. After walking out the front door and leaving my house with my backpack, I saw a car on the side of the street. It was right in front of the sidewalk where I would walk past. I had never seen it before, so I didn't know who it was. I planned to just go right past it, but when I did, I saw the passenger side window rolling down. Somebody said something, and I looked over. The car was an older dark gray BMW, and the driver was a young-looking guy, but seemed to be a little bit older than me. He then asked me if I needed a ride to school. I had never seen this guy before and didn't think that he even went to my school. He told me his name was, I think, Ryan, but I can't remember exactly. He said which school he went to, which happened to be a school in the next city over. Then he said that he was good friends with Erica, who happened to be one of my best friends. Apparently, he was going to pick her up, and she asked him to pick me up as well and give us both rides to school. I said no thanks. I had never heard Erica talk about this guy before, and it just seemed really weird. The guy asked me why not, and I said maybe some other time. I wanted to confirm with Erica if she knew this guy at all. I figured there was a chance that she was friends with him, but she hadn't said anything to me about this. Obviously, it was a little bit suspicious. The guy seemed disappointed, but ultimately said okay. I kept walking down the street as he pulled away in his car and drove past me. But right when he got past me, he stopped his car on the road. He rolled down his window again and said, "Last chance." I said no again, and then he finally drove off. I walked the rest of the way to school and got there at basically my normal time. As I was walking, I texted Erica about it. In that semester of high school, my first hour class was English. By the time I got to class, I had gotten a response from Erica. I usually didn't get to see her before school because our first hour classes were on the opposite ends of the school from each other. She said that she didn't even know who I was talking about. I had a feeling that's what she was going to say. This was a mystery to me of who this guy really was and why he tried to pick me up in his car. He knew that I had a friend named Erica, and he also knew where I went to school, but I didn't know him at all. During that same first hour English class, probably about 30 minutes in, the school went into a lockdown. I had no clue what it was for at the time. We had never had a lockdown before in my entire time at the school, just a few drills. We were all told to sit at the back of the class. The classroom lights were turned off, and the door was locked by our teacher. We all sat in mostly silence for what felt like a really long time. It didn't really last that long though, it was probably about 20 minutes. Eventually, the lockdown was lifted. By that time, we were all very curious as to what was going on. By the end of the day, I had found out. A man apparently walked into the school after class had started and right past the receptionist. The only door that was open after class started was the front door. He was then spotted by a hall monitor who asked him for a pass. The guy walked past him without saying anything and went to the locker commons. Then he hid there and the school was locked down. Unfortunately, the guy ran out from the locker commons to the nearest exit and was able to get out. The school and property was searched, but he had gotten away. It was good that he was gone, but it was also bad that he wasn't caught. Some of us were wondering where he went, but it could have been anywhere. There was large woods behind our school, and I think they pretty much gave up on the search when they found out he wasn't on the school property anymore. Still, I had no clue who the guy was who had been inside the school. I didn't even connect the dots at all. After school that day, I walked home like I always did. I was less than halfway there when I once again saw the car that was at my house earlier. I got a bad feeling. This guy was not who he claimed to be, and I knew that. The car was parked on the side of the road again, on the side that I had to walk past. I sped up and started walking faster, but when I got even with the car, once again I heard him say something. His window was already down, and the guy said hi. I looked over and said hi, all while continuing to walk. He then told me to stop. I didn't and ignored him. Then he said, "You know I was in your school earlier." I stopped and couldn't believe what I was hearing. He then started to laugh, and it was really creepy. He basically bragged about how they had locked the school down, and he managed to escape. As he was saying this, he opened his car door and got out. I walked even faster until the guy started to run. Then, at that point, I had to start running too. Unfortunately, it seemed as though he was a little bit faster than I was. I could tell that he was gaining on me. I left the sidewalk and ran out into the middle of the road. Then came possibly one of the luckiest moments of my entire life. A car started driving down that otherwise quiet road. I ran straight for the car, and when I got close, noticed that it was somebody that I actually knew. It was one of my classmates, a guy named Matt. He saw me and stopped his car. I ran for the passenger side, while the man chasing me continued to come after me and was about 20 feet back. I got inside of Matt's car and told him to lock the doors. The guy chasing reached the car moments later. The doors locked, and the guy tried getting in and then began pounding on the door when he couldn't. Matt asked me who this guy was, and I told him to just get out of there. He drove away, with the guy standing in the street. I explained to Matt as I got out my phone to call the police. I told them everything, and Matt dropped me off at my house a short time later. The police came out and talked with me and my parents, and said that they would look out for the car that I described. That same day, the man was located by the police. He had been stalking me for several days without me even knowing. I'm not sure exactly why he went into our school. Maybe he was waiting for me to get back to my locker. He could have honestly passed for a student because he looked young, but he was actually in his mid-20s and not a student at all. This was years ago now, but I still remember it all the time. I'm really glad Matt was driving by when he did. I don't know what would have happened to me if not. I'm a teacher, and this is something that happened a couple of years ago. It was during my 4th year teaching at the high school that I still currently teach at. I teach math, and had 4 different classes throughout the day that semester. It kept me very busy between teaching, preparing lessons, and grading assignments. One day, about a month into the school year, I was teaching like any other. It was the first hour of the day, and I was in the middle of going through a problem on the whiteboard. That's when the phone rang in my classroom. I paused what I was doing and walked over to answer it. I was told the school was being locked down, but I wasn't told why. After that, the announcement came over the entire school intercom. Some of the kids in class started to talk and asked me what the cause of the lockdown was. I honestly didn't know, and I told them that. I did what I was supposed to do and turned out the lights and locked the doors. I instructed the students to the back of the classroom. There were 20 kids in my class, and they all did what I said, but still wanted to know why we were in a lockdown. I knew this was not a drill, and I was pretty curious myself. I went to my desk and sat down in the chair. Then we all just waited. Minutes went by, which felt like forever. After about 10 minutes, my cell phone started vibrating. It was on top of my desk, and I picked it up to see who was calling me. It was a number that I didn't recognize. I was about to let it ring, but I thought it was possibly information about the lockdown. It may have been from another teacher whose number I didn't have yet. It could have been from another staff member as well. That's what was going through my mind in the moment. At the last minute, I accepted the call. I held the phone up to my ear and listened as I heard a man start to speak. I didn't really recognize his voice. He spoke professionally and told me that I was needed in the principal's office immediately. I asked why, and I was told that it would be discussed when I got there. I was very confused. I said I couldn't leave my class, and I was told that I needed to go anyways. Then he hung up. I saw my students looking at me, no doubt wondering what I was told on the phone. Then one of them spoke up and asked. I told them the truth and said somebody asked me to the principal's, and I really didn't know why. I was debating whether I should go or not. I got up from my desk and walked over to the door. Then I looked out the window and into the hallway. It was very empty. But then I saw someone. It was sort of far to the left, just barely in my sight. There was a man standing there wearing all black, including a ski mask. I quickly moved back after seeing him. One of the students asked me if I was going to go, and I said no, I wasn't. I told everyone to stay at the back of the class, and I joined them. I had no clue who the person in the hallway was, but the fact that they were wearing a ski mask could not be good. They were likely the reason for the lockdown. I didn't want my students to know that the person was so close though. Things were very silent for a few minutes. We couldn't hear anything from out in the hallways. It felt like forever, and the more time that went by, the more worried I became. I got another phone call on my phone from the same number, but I ignored it. They called back again, and at that point, I turned off my phone entirely. We all waited in the classroom for almost an hour. Finally, I got another call on my phone in the classroom. I walked over and picked it up. I was told that the lockdown was over, and then there was an announcement over the intercom letting us know. Class was over, and I let the students out. When I found out more details from the lockdown, I couldn't believe it. The person in the ski mask was a former student of our high school. He was also a former student of mine, who I had failed. He came back to the school, and he was the one who called me on my cell phone as well. I'm not sure how he got my number, but he did. He was trying to get me out of my classroom. I'm not sure what he was planning to do then, possibly attack me. I don't want to think about that. Luckily, he was spotted by a faculty member, which sent the school into a lockdown. Eventually, the police came and were able to locate the suspect and catch him, although he was able to evade them for quite a while. I still can't believe it, even to this day. I can't imagine what would have happened had I left the classroom. It was too strange though, and I never really seriously considered it. I could tell that something was really suspicious. Still, I will never forget seeing him in the hallway. It was one of the scariest sights of my life.
I used to think that lockdown drills were pointless in my school because nothing ever happened in our tiny little town. I learned that I couldn't have been more wrong though, and I'll forever be thankful for those drills because they're most likely the only reason that a lot of kids in my grade are still alive today. It all went down during our pre-prom assembly. We had all heard about the assembly from seniors that had to go through it the previous year, and according to them, it was super boring. It was pretty much an hour-long talk about why drinking and driving was bad, something that we were all well aware of, but it didn't even make it 5 minutes into the speech before all hell broke loose. It may have been 4 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Miss Belmont was walking across the stage as she prepared to show a video on the dangers of drinking and driving on prom night. Everyone in the auditorium was quietly talking amongst themselves as they pretended to listen to her talk, but within a matter of a second, silence came over the entire room. Around 200 high school juniors fell silent as the sound of gunshots rang out from the hallway. The way our school was laid out, our auditorium was placed right inside the main entrance, and from the sound of things, the shooting was coming from near the greeter's desk right on the other side of the auditorium doors. 2 shots were fired, and everyone inside the auditorium quickly lowered themselves down into our seats as we listened in hopes that we had all misheard what was going on, but that clearly wasn't the case. Before anything else happened, I'll never forget how calm and collected Miss Belmont was as she spoke over the microphone and told all of us to follow our typical lockdown protocols. All of us turned our attention away from the auditorium doors and looked at the teachers up on the stage as they all gestured for us to slowly come out of our seats and make our way up the stairs next to the stage. Surprisingly enough, we all did our best to stay calm and followed the teacher's directions as we formed multiple lines leading up the stairs to the auditorium stage. The room was beginning to fill with quiet muttering as we all worried about what was going to happen to us, and I remember looking around to see if I could find any of my friends. We all slowly made our way onto the stage, and then one of the teachers walked us over to an emergency exit that was located right on the other side of the curtain. He began ushering people through the door, which was what we were all taught to do since the auditorium doors didn't lock properly. After exiting the door, we were supposed to make our way into the hallway between the auditorium and the music classrooms, and from there, we were supposed to go right into those classrooms and lock the doors as we waited. I was toward the front of the line, and I remember feeling the teacher pull me forward to keep the line moving as we began walking out into the hallway. However, I didn't make it 2 steps out of the door before the few of us that made it out all stopped. We were stunned to see the gunman had made his way around the auditorium and was now looking down the hallway that we're all standing in. We quickly turned around and began forcing our way back into the auditorium as we all yelled that the shooter was in the hallway. We could hear shots being fired as bullets hit the walls near where we had all been standing. Thankfully, we all managed to make it back into the auditorium, and the teacher quickly closed the door behind us. He grabbed a ladder that was right next to him and stuck one of its legs through the door handle and used the rest of the ladder to bar the door shut. It came just in time too, because as soon as it was secured, we could hear the man on the other side of the door trying to force it open. We all quickly stepped away from the door as another teacher made their way around and tried their best to secure all of the emergency exits in a similar fashion. As the next couple of minutes passed, we could periodically hear the sounds of shots being fired throughout the school. Each time it seemed like the gunman was getting farther and farther away, but that didn't matter. Every second that passed, we were all horrified that he would come back our way and try to get into the auditorium again. It took 9 minutes for the police to arrive, but when they finally got there, they cleared out the school and managed to take down the shooter without having to fire a single shot at him. The shooter turned out to be a substitute teacher, and although the 2 greeters along with the school security guard ended up getting shot, they all made full recoveries, and as far as I know, they still work at the school. That was hands down the most terrifying day of my life and the most memorable school assembly that I ever attended. It wasn't until my sophomore year of high school that I learned the importance of keeping at least one ear open when you're in public. And by that, I simply mean don't have both headphones on when you're out of the house. I learned this simply because I had both my soundproof headphones on during study hall one day, and I kept them on when I ran to the bathroom between classes. Well, it was during that time that the lockdown bell rang, and all of the students in the rest of the school were notified to get into the nearest classroom because there was an unknown adult on the premises. As I said, I had my headphones on and I couldn't hear anything, so when I walked out of the bathroom into a cleared out hallway, I just assumed that I missed the bell. I let out a sigh as I figured I was going to get in trouble for being late to class, and I started walking down the hall. As I made my way around a corner, I saw a man standing in the hallway looking around, and when he saw me, he immediately pointed in my direction. I thought that I was going to get in trouble, so I took my headphones off and immediately apologized and told the man that I was on my way to class. I just got held up in the bathroom. He told me that it didn't matter what my excuse was, and that he needed to escort me to class so he could talk to the teacher. I rolled my eyes and said all right as we both started walking toward my class. Right away, I started getting the weird feeling from this guy since he kept looking down at me but not saying anything. We made it to the base of the stairs that I normally took to get to my trigonometry class, which he would have known if he actually worked in the school. But instead of turning to go up the stairs, the man kept walking me down the hall that we were in. That was when I realized that, unlike the rest of the school staff, the man wasn't wearing any sort of school badge or name tag. My eyes widened as this stranger continued to guide me down the hallway, and I decided to ask him what class he taught. He responded by simply saying, "Don't question me." And then he placed his hand on the back of my neck and continued to walk me down the hall. As we made our way around a corner, I could see one of the entrances to the school and knew in my gut that this guy was trying to get me to leave the building. I knew that I didn't have much time, and all I could do was try to run. I started walking a bit fast to try to get ahead of him so his hand wasn't touching me anymore. And the second I felt the slightest bit of distance between us, I quickly spun to the right and sprinted right past him, back down the hall that we came from. I made it to the base of the staircase and started running up it as I heard the footsteps of the man chasing me. As I made it to the top of the stairs, I could hear him getting closer and closer. But thankfully, as I stepped out the staircase onto the second floor hallway, I saw 2 security guards who were looking for the intruder. I yelled to them that he was right behind me, and they immediately started running toward me. I turned around and saw the man as he made his way back down the stairs, and the school security guards pursued him. At that moment, I noticed one of the teachers across the hall from me gesturing for me to come into their classroom. So I did that as fast as I could and spent the rest of the lockdown waiting for them to tell us that the school was safe. My parents were called and I had to speak with the police after it was all over, and thankfully by the end of the day, they ended up arresting the guy after finding him trying to sneak through backyards in town. They believe he was trying to make it back to his house, which was also right in town. Ever since then, I will always pay attention to any announcement made when I'm out somewhere.
To start, both my parents and I have grown up in a small southeastern town in Kentucky. The landscape is quite rural, and the actual city only has one stoplight in it, even in 2019. For the most part, the area is peaceful, and it feels as if everyone knows each other. While this story doesn't involve the paranormal, it is extremely terrifying. A real-life nightmare, if you will. The story begins on September 18th, 1989 in the county's only high school. Both of my parents were teachers at this said school. My mother happened to be in her planning period and was sitting in her teacher's lounge with a few other personnel. Their planning was cut short when a fellow female teacher ran screaming immediately into the teacher's round, stating, "He's got a gun! He's got a gun!" Understandably, the teacher was too distressed to explain in detail and immediately ran screaming out of the lounge. Everyone immediately scrambled to escape or hide from the gunmen. My mother, a fellow teacher and teacher's aide, ran into a small closet and attempted to hide. The closet was tiny, and along with 3 small women currently occupying it, was also home to a fold-away bed. No matter how hard they tried to close the door, the bed kept getting in the way. They were afraid to open the door and shove the bed out, as it would be a dead giveaway that someone was in the closet. After the initial shock, things began to quiet down in the school. They could hear a few shots fired, but had no idea how close the gunfire was in proximity to them. They literally crammed like sardines in a hot closet, unsure when or if the shooter would come for them. Though they tried to remain silent, my mother did make a plea for their salvation, as it was almost certain they wouldn't make it out of the school alive. The time ticked away slowly, and after an hour of being in the closet, they began to hear footsteps. The footsteps were slowly coming down the hallway toward the room they were in. Soft sounds clicking as if someone was searching around the hallway. As they came closer, the footsteps stopped in the doorway of the teacher's lounge. It was almost as if they could feel a pair of eyes searching the room from top to bottom, looking for any sign of life. My mom and the other woman had their hands on the doorknob, trying to keep it closed as much as possible. They were almost certain this was the end. Suddenly, they heard the person walk away and enter a nearby bathroom. My father also had a free first block, so he was seated at his desk trying to catch up on grading student assignments. Suddenly, he heard a loud noise, which he said sounded like a large table falling over. He wondered at what the sound might be, but figured it was simply a table that had gotten knocked over or someone had dropped several textbooks. Unlike the teacher's lounge, my father's classroom was located upstairs in a smaller portion of the school. While he continued grading papers, he began to hear someone running down the hallway. It was a teacher that seemed to be searching through the classrooms. He stopped in the doorway and said, "One of the kids brought a gun and has taken hostages. We need to evacuate the other classmates immediately." My dad quickly said, "I'll take the right side of the hall and you take the left." They then set off running down the halls to notify teachers and students. However, most of the classrooms had already been emptied. They would find out later that many of the classrooms had heard the initial gunshots and realized instantly what the sound was. The first floor classrooms had tried to evacuate by either running to the far stairwell or jumping out the windows into the parking lot. The classroom doors had small windows in which you could see people passing outside. The classroom that was located across the gunfire had been too scared to exit into the hallway, at risk of being shot. The students were all jumping out of the windows in droves. The poor teacher was heavily pregnant, and the windows were quite narrow and only slanted slightly when they opened. It took a great deal of effort, but they got her out of the window. The students and teachers were scared for their life, not knowing if the shooter would suddenly barge into their room and begin shooting as they tried to exit. My dad eventually located a classroom that had not been evacuated. He ran over to the teacher and explained the situation. He then spoke to the students and told them, "You need to exit the school right now. Don't take your belongings. Don't go to the bathroom. Don't talk to anyone. As quietly as you can, take the far stairwell and don't look behind you. Go now." My dad is likely one of the most laid-back individuals you could ever meet. The students knew this and listened closely, knowing the situation was dire. Everyone rushed to the far stairwell, away from the gunmen, and exited to the bus garage. Dad said that the police arrived within minutes of them emptying the building and corralled everyone over to a funeral home that was across the road from the high school. Within 30 minutes, a SWAT team arrived and had set up a perimeter both inside and outside of the school. A family member had found out about the situation and called my grandfather, my mother's father. He had rushed to the school to check on his daughter and son-in-law. As my dad was waiting with the students in the funeral home parking lot, he began to search for my mother. My father asked one of the teachers that had been in the lounge with my mom if he had seen her. He said he thought she was outside. Dad once again searched through the crowd asking if anyone had seen my mother. By this time, my grandfather had arrived and asked my father where my mom was. He said that he couldn't find her. He again asked the teacher who had been in the lounge with her, and he said, "Well, come to think of it, I remember her saying that she might hide in the closet." Everyone was terrified of what might have happened to her, since it had been close to 3 hours since the gunman had entered the building. My father and grandfather notified some of the Kentucky State Police that were on the scene. Under the watchful eyes of snipers located in the parking lot and on the roof, the KSP officers entered the school and headed for the closet they thought my mother was in. My mother said that she and the other woman could hear someone outside, and they almost died of fright. Without announcement, the doorknob was suddenly ripped from their hands, and light flooded into the closet. Not hearing a cacophony of gunfire, my mom looked up and realized there were 2 armed state troopers standing outside the closet. She said that it was probably the best sight in her entire life. There were no times for tears of joy, though. The officers told my mother and the other 2 women, "You're going to be okay, but we need to get you out of the building ASAP. We need you to rush down the hallway, and when you come into the lobby to exit, you need to run." After a count, my mother was ushered from teacher's lounge toward the high school lobby. She said when she rounded the corner, there were multiple snipers set up in the hall along with a .50 caliber machine gun pointed at the classroom where the shooter was. That day, my mother had worn a dress and heels, and she said she could remember trying to run across the grass in her heels, getting stuck in the soil. She kept running through until she joined the others in the funeral home parking lot. The initial takeover had begun around 9:50 a.m. during the first block of classes. The shooter had entered the school with 3 guns, 1 shotgun, a .357 pistol, and a .44 caliber Magnum, and walked into his first block class. Upon entering the classroom, he shot into the ceiling through the art classroom located above. Luckily, no one was hit by a bullet or debris of the initial shot. He released 2 rows of students and the teacher before settling in for a standoff. The woman that initially told everyone in the teacher's lounge about the shooting had been the teacher released from the classroom. Over the next few hours, students were released for small requests like cigarettes, soft drinks, and pizza. Multiple shots were fired throughout the ordeal, but thankfully no one was injured or killed. The shooter was later identified as a 17-year-old student at the high school, advised police that he would surrender if he could see his father. He told police that he hadn't seen his father since he was 4 years old. Around 5 p.m. that day, the last hostage was released. The Kentucky State Police eventually negotiated his surrender before his father could arrive from Florida. While most people never know the reason behind such an insane act of violence, upon questioning, the shooter referred to the Stephen King book Rage as his inspiration for the shooting. Crazy enough, my dad didn't think the student served any prison time. It was his belief that while the boy was initially taken to jail after surrendering, he was never tried and was instead released out of the county and told to never return. I guess 1989 was a different time. My dad says that word had quickly spread after the takeover, and that many parents had arrived to the scene and were looking for their children. One of them asked my father where his son was, and my dad wasn't for sure, and that's what he told the parent. However, he had been too afraid to tell him that he thought he was currently being held hostage. It turns out he was. Many of the students held hostage suffered from PTSD and had to undergo counseling for many years. Fortunately, no one was physically harmed, though. Once my parents were finally released from the scene, they had driven straight to my babysitters to pick me up. Being less than a year old, I was oblivious to the chaos that my parents had experienced that day. They say when they saw me, they picked me up and prayed that the little girl would never have to experience anything like that.